to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is Dr. Gloria Vanderhorst, who's been in practice for over 35 years in this area. Thanks so much for being here, Gloria.
You are welcome. I really value what you're doing.
Thank you. So I have to admit that up until January of this year, I guess I lived in a little bubble for 40 years, and I never really experienced death in my own immediate family. So my grandmother died in January of this year, and my mom took care of everything. She only had one daughter, and there's only one granddaughter. So it was actually very smooth. But I know from what I see from my clients in the divorce world that is very atypical. And for some reason, a lot of times my clients, in addition to unraveling their own marriage, are also dealing with some recent death in their family, or the declining health of their parents. So it's a double whammy that they're dealing with. And maybe I thought we could start with you explaining the grief cycle.
I think everyone is familiar with Kubler-Ross's grief cycle and the stages that someone goes through to, first of all, just deny that there's an impact on them. And then as you progress through those stages of, being angry, trying to negotiate with yourself or with just the relationship of life in general, you end up coming to a point of acceptance, but that takes time. And typically what happens with the loss of a parent is that there's a time frame in which you need to move through the settlement of the estate, and that's very different from the emotional time frame of acceptance. So you're going through this legal process, you're going through the dynamics with your siblings, if you have siblings, at the very time that you actually need to be intellectually sharp, and you need to be thinking creatively, you need to be asking a variety of questions. Your brain's not prepared to do that because it's grieving. And it's really experiencing that significant loss.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, because the same thing in the divorce world, right? We're in a legal process, and there are timelines that we have to go with. But meanwhile, the emotions are there, and they're running rampant, and it really can impact how someone makes decisions. Do you think it makes a difference whether the death is sudden versus something that they expect?
Oh, I think it does make a difference. Yeah, I could share some of my own experience. My mother died last year, and it was a fairly brief illness with cancer, but there was enough preparation time that she could experience visiting with everyone in the family, and everyone in the family just kind of cycled through, spending a week with her and reminiscing and really enjoying her company. And there was time to actually prepare for that loss. It doesn't mean that the loss was easy, but it does mean that, she was supported and that everyone had an opportunity to kind of have closure with her. But in a sudden loss, which was the experience with my father, he woke up one morning and basically collapsed and went to the hospital and died.
Wow.
And so that sudden loss is much more difficult to process because not only are you grieving, but you're also in shock.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, and that makes a big difference both physiologically and emotionally to be processing this while your body's in shock.
So what have you seen happens with siblings? Because, again, my situation is very atypical. It wasn't until 2 years ago I discovered I have two brothers.
Right.
So we don't have any sort of baggage. When we get together, it's like, getting together with a colleague, a friend, you're having fun. There's no past baggage.
Right.
But that is not normal for siblings.
No, that is not. And what happens when the last parent dies is that the pattern of interaction from childhood sneaks up on the sibling group and reemerges. It's like falling into a time tunnel if you think of Alice in Wonderland,
Right.
you know, that Alice was just playing out in the yard and then falls down the rabbit hole, and suddenly she gets transformed. You know, some days she's tiny, some days she's big, sometimes she's powerful, sometimes she's being abused. And I think the same thing happens with sibling groups. When the parent dies, even the sibling group that says we really want to do this respectfully, we want to maintain relationships with each other, you will still get trapped and thrown down the rabbit hole. And it's how you manage that. You know, you go into this time tunnel and you begin to experience your sister or your brother as the person who teased you, or the person who neglected you, or the person who didn't rescue you from some childhood experience. And all of that comes into the present as though it's really happening now. So you have to be able to say to yourself, all right, this is very familiar. It feels just like it did when, you know, my brother got angry at me and left me at the mall and I was frightened. You know, it feels like I'm being abandoned all over again by this sibling. But I'm not 6. I'm not in the mall. All right? You do have to talk yourself out of the tunnel. But first you have to recognize, whoops, I just got sucked down the time tunnel. And a lot of people don't recognize that. They'll bring back that old history and believe that that's exactly what's happening in the present.
Well, especially if a lot of us have a tendency to bury issues, right?
Correct.
Rather than deal with them.
Right.
So all of a sudden this death is bringing to the surface a lot of possibly unresolved issues
Right.
from the past.
Right. Things that you know, have had an impact on your life. But things that you really haven't processed, to be able to say, that's from childhood, here's what's happening in the present, and to be able to separate those. And then be able to problem solve both of them. You know, the death of a parent is an opportunity to go down the time tunnel
Right.
and say, I've been holding this, you know, for 35 years, and I don't want to hold it anymore. I want to be able to resolve it. You know, will you talk through this with me? And then to recognize, you know, the person you're interacting with now through the loss of your parent isn't that 12-year-old.
Right.
All right? It's someone who's 55 and has matured themselves, and so they don't have the same dynamics that they bring
Hopefully.
to the relationship, hopefully. And most of us grow in some ways and mature, so that you can look at them with a different perspective. So you have to resolve both of those. Both, you know, here's the history that sucked me down the rabbit hole, and here's what's happening in the present that I don't like about the way that you're managing this loss, or about the way that you're making decisions with the estate, and, you know, here are the solutions that we could generate in the present.
It sounds like a process that would be very difficult for someone to do on their own.
It is a process that's
Yeah.
difficult to do on your own. I like the example with my sisters in the loss of my mother, because those two, older and younger in the family, that distance caused them to fight like cats and dogs when they were kids. But they came together in a very cooperative way to facilitate the last few weeks of my mother's death process. And they were gentle with each other, cooperative with each other. And so it was a wonderful experience for all of us to see how they could support her in the last few days of her life. But when the hospital bed was removed, it also enabled her to die at home, which was one of her desires. The fights came out again. You know, when they had to start sorting through things,
I was gonna ask
and
about
reading
that.
through papers, and, you know, deciding how to divide things or following instructions that Mother had left behind. It's just like the claws came out and they were off to the races with each other.
Yeah, I can imagine that'd be difficult if someone just wants to, like, you know, donate everything to Goodwill just to be done with it, and the other person...
That was one of the issues Right? We're not going to sort through this. Everything in this closet goes to the Goodwill, and the other one's saying, wait a minute, there's some lovely things in here.
Oh, God, yeah. So I imagine I've seen this a lot with my clients and friends, unfortunately, that usually there's one that is the responsible one, right? That especially towards the end might be making all of the decisions and might be taking care of things. And there seems to be a lot of tension when that money gets divided and this person might say, well, I'm going to divide it the way I see best. Have you seen that?
I have seen that. If parents are not making clear decisions prior to their death and informing their children, and I think that's the key. If parents can face their own mortality and make good plans for whatever they're leaving behind, it could be something small or it could be a huge estate, if they can make good plans and publish those, have a meeting with your children, and if necessary, have a meeting with your children and the estate lawyer and a mental health professional to say, we want everyone to be on the same page, at least with knowing what our wishes are, how we've set this up. So the expectation after that loss is I'm not thrown into Never Never Land. This is something that I know Mom and Dad took care of. I have ideas of what to expect at this point. So even if I don't like some of the choices that they made, I've had an opportunity to hear about it, to voice my objection, to process my objections with them, and to come to a place of acceptance. So it isn't a shock. It isn't something that I just have to address when I am highly emotional. I already know what the plan is, and so I can move through the plan much more easily.
Yeah, I guess that would make sense. I mean, the most visceral reaction you get from children is usually when they're being commanded to do something without any input, right? And that's when I'm going to get the worst temper tantrum from my son.
Right.
Right, so adults are the same way, I guess. If you have this now deceased parent who's dictated this is how it's going to happen and they feel like they didn't get any input in the end, that could be very difficult for even an adult to deal with.
Yeah, it will trigger conflicts, it will trigger fights, it will trigger lawsuits. That's quite common among family members who have a substantial estate to settle and to figure out. They'll go to war with each other rather than negotiate.
Right. And we're going to actually take a short break, but come back to that point because I think it's a great point.
Okay.
Okay. And then we will be right back.
All right, guys, we gotta be smarter about what we bite on, okay? I want everyone to go outside. We're gonna run Red Rover on 3.
What about you, Tony?
I'm gonna run around in circles, flatten my arms, and make engine noises like this.
When it comes to playing, we kids are the pros.
We're eating right, too.
We fuel up to play 60.
Your school doesn't have a program? Be a leader. Start one.
Click today and join the movement.
Welcome back to Making It Last, where we share ideas to help families tackle major issues. I'm your host, Regina DeMeo, and with me today is Dr. Gloria Vanderhorst, who is a mental health professional who's been here for over 35 years in this area.
That's right.
Thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome.
So right before the break, we were talking about how sometimes things escalate when you're managing your parents' estate, and some people go down the dark side to litigation. But there is another approach that people have been using, which originally started with divorces, right? And it's the collaborative approach. Now, have you experienced or heard of cases where this has been successfully applied?
Yes, I have. And it's a wonderful idea for the siblings to come together with a mediator, a lawyer, and a mental health professional, or someone who can really help them to process what is triggering each of them and what are the real problems to solve. I have one example where the parent did not really do a good job of planning, and one of the older siblings actually lived with mother that there was no provision made for what happens when mother dies. How will the family respond to this older sibling who has some problems, not employable,
Wow.
but has always been supported by the parents. And so the siblings, even though they lived in various places all over the United States, decided that they would work together in this collaborative way. They came together for an in-person meeting initially
Okay.
to really talk through, this is a problem for us. And, we have to decide how to proceed. And with the help of a collaboratively trained professional, they were able to make some really good decisions. First of all, not to sell the house for a period of time so that the sibling would have a place to live and not be homeless. And then to do the research that the parents had never done, which is, what is really the issue with this adult sibling? Can we get any kind of services and assistance for this adult sibling? And of course, they had to use money from the estate to do that. But because they had the help of a collaborative mediator, they were really able to see the value in doing that and to understand that in the long run, this was actually going to save them not only money, but it was going to save their relationships as well, for them to come together and operate as a team to figure out solutions for this adult sibling. But I think it's a good idea anytime there is a loss of a parent to set up a system where you have a way of coming together, you have a facilitator, someone who's collaboratively trained, who can help you look at what are the issues that you face, what are the options for solving that, and what's coming from childhood, what's coming from adulthood, that can kind of point out, okay, there you go, down the rabbit hole again. And that's okay, that's natural for you to be triggered by things from childhood. But let's process that and then let's come back to the present and solve the task that faces us in the present. And there are always issues to resolve. Even the best planned estate is still going to lead to some issues, some conflicts. So, if you can see to be proactive, you're going to be able to maintain the sibling relationships, maybe even improve the sibling relationships, and in that way also honor your parents. Because I don't think any parent wants to see their legacy dissolve after their death and to see their children go into serious conflict with each other.
No, that's a great point. I think a lot of people don't pay attention. There's just unintended consequences that result from their actions. And I know this one case where there were 5 children, and the youngest at the end was the one in the last year or so that really took care of the last dying parent. And all of the documents were then given to him, the power of attorney to become the executor, all of that. And in his infinite wisdom, he decided that of the 5 children, he's the one that needed the money the most, right? Because he's the youngest with the youngest children. Everybody else had already, done well for themselves. So he was going to keep it all. And what wound up happening is he got excommunicated from the other 4 siblings, who never spoke to him again. And they also never spoke to his children again. So as a result, there are these 2 young women who have no aunts or uncles, no cousins that they can contact, and it's a horrible situation, which I'm sure this person never saw coming when he, in his own little mind, justified what he was about to do for the sake of these 2 girls.
Right. And I think that's common, that particularly when there's been the need to care for a parent and make difficult decisions about perhaps putting them in nursing homes and then having to provide support and care for them, maybe helping them through a real serious illness, that's a labor
Yeah.
for a sibling, a labor. And I don't think that unless you're the person doing it, your brothers and sisters really don't appreciate how difficult it is, how much time and energy it takes, and how you never get relief from it. You know, so you may go home, you may play with your children, but you never get emotional relief from that responsibility. And so it does build up this sense of entitlement and a deep need to be cared for yourself. So even though it, you know, when you tell the story now, it sounds like this man was, you know, selfish or unthinking, but in essence, I would bet that he was just deeply needy and had no way of disclosing that to his siblings. Whereas if the group had been working with a professional, there would have been opportunity to surface that, and for the rest of the family to really give him some support and to honor the labor and the cost for him. So there's an emotional cost, there's a time cost, and, you know, helping your parent to live out the end of their life. And if you're the sibling that lives 10 minutes away and everybody else is in California, they can't appreciate it.
Right.
And even if they come to visit, you know, they'll give you a few days break from it, but they don't give you the emotional break of, I can release the tension in my body because I don't have to be thinking about, worrying about what's happening with my parent in the nursing home. You know, is he being well taken care of? Are they stealing his glasses again? And all those small things that would be on that person's mind continuously. And so the very fact that there wasn't an intervention with a collaborative professional really led to a disaster for everybody, and even for the next generation.
Right. So what are some tips you would have for siblings?
Talk to your parents while they're alive. Okay, and make that request that they do the work of estate planning and that they make that information known to you so that you can process with them anything that is distressing, anything that you think is unfair, so that you have resolution before having to lose your parents and be surprised by, here's the plan that they've left behind. And then prepare yourselves. When my mother was in the process of dying, of course I went on the internet and looked for any books that would help families about, you know, what do you do when your parent dies? How do you keep your siblings kind of talking to each other and processing with each other? And I found a little paperback called The Settlement Game, and it was very helpful, and we passed it around so that everybody had an opportunity to think about, here are the stressors that we're going to experience, here are the ways that we can help each other, simple things like, you know, how do you divide. My mother had a collection of something like 500 cream pitchers, which in actuality nobody else wanted. You know, she collected those for herself, for her own pleasure, but you had to do something with them. You know, no one's putting 500 cream pitchers on eBay. Right? You have to do something with them. And so, you know, my sisters who were there cleaned out the bedroom, put masking tape in 4 square on the bedroom floor, and just took those pictures and set them all over the floor, put a name in each square, boxed them up. You got your portion of pictures.
Oh, that's funny.
Whether you wanted them or not. But it was something that we could laugh about. It was something we could, you know, do together and say, you know, this seems silly, but here's the best way to get rid of those pictures. All right, we'll just box them up and send them to everybody. Then you get to do with it whatever you want with it. So, thinking together beforehand, and then making a plan to say, even though we might be ready for this, we will be thrown back into childhood. So let's get familiar with someone who knows how to help us settle an estate. Let's find a good lawyer who's collaboratively trained so they can also help us process the emotional piece of this. Or let's put a mental health professional into the mix, because we're going to have emotional struggles through this. And using that process can make a significant difference for a family and, as you've described in your story, for the next generation as well. That's a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely helps to have someone who's neutral, that's not involved in the situation, kind of keep you focused and facilitate conversations. I mean, that's what I love about the mediation and collaborative process, right? I am not the one that's going through the divorce. I've been through mine. And it's funny because the one very emotional thing, it was not about the money, it was not about the sale of the house, it was the Christmas ornaments. For some reason, when we went through those Christmas ornaments, all of a sudden I lost it. I remembered each and every time, the day after Christmas, all those sales where I collected those. And even though it was joint marital funds that were used to purchase those Christmas ornaments, they were mine. That was my endeavor. And so it is funny. I can see how in an estate, it could be the creamers. It could be
anything.
Insignificant thing that will set someone off because you're just emotional.
And that's natural. That, the attachment that you had to the ornaments, the sense of this is how I am supporting my family emotionally, this is a tradition that I want to establish for my family. It's an act of love. And anytime we engage in an act of love, we really want to be honored. We want to be appreciated. And prior to a loss, many times you can't predict what's going to be the trigger for you, which particular object or which memento is going to have extreme significance for you. And particularly with the death of parents, those could go back to very early childhood. My sister found a doll that was her Christmas present when she was 5. And just flooded with memories about how important that doll had been to her. So, we can be caught unaware.
So if someone wanted to contact you for further information, how would they do that?
They could call me. My phone number is 301-578-8760, or you can find me on the web at www.drvanderhorst.com.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week on Making It Last.